don't ask me to repeat. It started with a whisper, a soft one, like the rustle of dried leaves on asphalt in late autumn. Anna heard it for the first time while washing dishes. A voice, or rather a semblance of one, rustled right by her ear. Repeat. She flinched, turned around. Behind her was only the wall and the window, reflecting her pale, tired figure. I imagined it, she decided, drying her hands. But a sticky, inexplicable chill had already settled in her chest. Anna lived alone in an old two-room apartment on the outskirts of the city. It was a quiet, almost desolate place. The nearly deaf old man downstairs didn't count. Her solitude hadn't burdened her as long as it was just silence. But silence is emptiness, and now something had appeared in the emptiness. The next day, she was sorting through old boxes in the storage loft. Dust, yellowed photographs, childhood drawings. And again, that same voice, this time clearer, wetter, as if the speaker was standing right against the back of her head. Repeat after me. She froze, her heart pounding somewhere in her throat. Who's there? She exhaled, clutching a photograph of herself at 6 years old with her mother by a lake. There was no answer. Only dust slowly swirling in a beam of light from the dormer window. That evening, making tea, she heard it again. Now it sounded almost like her own voice, but distorted, like a recording slowed down and played backwards. Say, "It won't come if you don't call." And then real, animal terror gripped her. She wasn't just hearing it. She understood. The entity, whatever it was, needed her to say something out loud. It couldn't do it itself. She had to become its voice. She huddled in a corner of the room, plugged her ears, and sat there until dawn. The whisper didn't return. She thought she was going crazy. Fatigue, work stress, loneliness. Yes, that was logical. She even believed it for one night. But the next night, the whisper came again. Not a request, but an order. And it wasn't by her ear anymore. It sounded inside her skull, as if someone were gently scratching from inside the bone, trying to get out. Repeat, say, "The door is open." "No!" she screamed in her mind, clutching her head. "Go away!" Silence fell, long, viscous. It was quiet for a week. Anna began to breathe. Maybe she really had imagined it. She even turned on the TV for background noise, something she hadn't done for years. Then, on Friday, she was watching some old movie. On screen, the hero, laughing, said the phrase, "Well, now I'll never leave the house." And her lips, entirely on their own, without the slightest command from her brain, twitched. They silently repeated those words, like an echo. Anna jumped up, threw the remote. This was the worst part. Her body was starting to slip out of her control. From that moment on, the whisper was constant, quiet, intrusive, relentless. It offered simple, meaningless phrases. Say, the window is cold. Whisper, the shadow is long. She clenched her teeth until they hurt, bit her lips until they bled, but the force pressing on her will was like a hydraulic press. Once, while cutting bread, she suddenly said clearly and loudly, "It cuts easily," and she sobbed with helplessness. She understood the rules. She didn't know what would happen if she repeated its special phrase, the one it so desperately wanted to hear. But each time she gave in and uttered something at its command, its influence grew. Now it could twitch her fingers, make her stare at one spot for hours. She felt this thing soaking into her, like ink soaking into paper. Despair led her to the internet, deep in forums dedicated to the paranormal. She stumbled upon a thread with a similar description. The last message from a user named Still Whispering said, "It wants you to say its name. Never, never do that. The name gives form. Form gives access. It will enter your world through your voice. And the first thing it will do," the message broke off. Anna went cold. Now she knew the ultimate goal, and she knew she was losing. That night, the battle peaked. She lay in bed, curled up in a ball, while a hurricane raged inside her mind. The voice, now almost indistinguishable from her own thoughts, whispered, pleaded, threatened. It threw fragments of her childhood memories, the voices of dead relatives, promises of peace if she would just say one word. "You're tired, Anna. Just say my name. You know it. Listen. Listen closely." It crept into her dreams. She dreamed she was standing in front of a mirror, and her reflection slowly, with a dead, glassy smile, moved its lips, uttering that very name she must not hear. She woke up screaming. There was a taste of copper and decay in her mouth. She realized she couldn't hold on any longer. Her strength was leaving her. The entity already controlled her dreams. It could move her lips in her sleep. Sooner or later, in delirium, in a half dream, she would say it. And so she made a desperate decision. If she couldn't drive it out, she had to deprive it of its tool, her voice. She got up, poured a glass of water. Her hands were shaking. She went to the medicine cabinet, found small, sharp manicure scissors. The plan was monstrous and simple. Damage her vocal cords. Make herself mute forever. She opened her mouth wide in front of the bathroom mirror, raised the scissors points down. Her reflection was distorted with horror. Her eyes were filled with tears. She gathered all her will, and at that moment, her own eyes in the mirror blinked out of sync with her. Then her reflection slowly, very slowly, spread into a wide, unnatural smile. A smile that wasn't on her face. Her own hand, as if on its own, unclenched its fingers. The scissors clattered into the sink. From her throat, against her will, a rasp escaped, which formed into a whisper coming from her own mouth, but sounding as if there was now one more person in the room. Don't deprive us of a voice. We need it." Then the voice changed. It became low, wet, full of unspeakable ancient malice. And it spoke now not through her, but from her, using her vocal cords as its own. Fine, you don't want to speak. Then I'll say it myself. Anna's jaw hung open wider than anatomy allowed. Her throat swelled, and from her wide open mouth poured a stream of horrifying guttural sounds. It was a word, a name, syllable by syllable, creaking, breaking, as if being born for the first time in millennia. With the final sound, the lights in the apartment went out, but darkness didn't fall. The wall in front of her was flooded with a thick, blacker than black shadow. It had no clear outlines, but something stirred within it, many things. And from this shadow, like an echo from an abyss, that very name was repeated, now gaining strength, volume, and presence. The shadow took a step forward. Anna couldn't move. She could only watch as that darkness reached for her. The last thing she felt before the cold touched her lips was understanding. She hadn't uttered the name, but her voice had. It was enough. The door was open. Now she's standing by your window. You don't see her. But if in the silence, in the sound of water, in the creak of floorboards, you hear a whisper light, intrusive, asking you to repeat some nonsense, don't give in. Just know. This isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning. For you. Because if you answer even once, she will need your voice to say the next name, to let another one in. Cover your mouth with your hand and stay silent. Stay silent with all your might, while you still can. The shoulder. It all started when Leonid bought an old apartment, not just old, but a Stalinka with high ceilings, creaking parquet floors, and thick walls that seemed to breathe history. The agent, his eyes glinting, said something about the spirit of the era and an excellent price for such square footage. The price truly was suspiciously good. The first oddity happened on the third day. Leonid, while unpacking books, felt a barely perceptible touch on his left shoulder, heavy, like a whole palm. He turned around. Behind him was only an empty room and dusty sunset rays in the window. He blamed it on fatigue. But the touch returned, always on the left shoulder, always when he was alone. It wasn't cold or slimy. It was room temperature, solid, and unmistakably human, as if someone, standing right behind him, was placing a hand on his shoulder in a gesture of comfort or possession. Leonid grew nervous. He checked the apartment, locked the doors, even installed a motion-activated camera in the living room. The footage only showed him always alone. Meanwhile, the touch grew stronger. Now it lingered for seconds, sometimes tens of seconds. One night, waking from a nightmare, he felt it so distinctly that he thought the fingers slightly squeezed his muscle. He cried out and turned on the light. The room was empty. He started digging into the building's history. In the archives, he found a sparse entry. Before the war, an NKVD investigator named Vasily K. lived in this apartment. A few photographs of him even survived a stooped man with an unremarkable yet intense gaze. In one photo, he was standing in this very living room, his hand resting on the shoulder of a man sitting in an armchair. That man's face was cut off by the edge of the picture, but his posture, head bowed, shoulders hunched, made it clear this was not a friendly gesture. It was a gesture of control, ownership. The touch became obsessive. Leonid almost got used to its constancy. It was with him at breakfast, in the shower, at work. It was like a quiet, invisible companion. He even started talking to it, first in anger, "Leave me alone." Then in plea, "Please go away." His shoulder began to ache at night, as if an invisible weight truly lay upon it. And then he saw the reflection. It happened in the dark screen of the turned-off TV. Leonid walked past and glanced at his vague reflection, and he saw that behind his back, in the reflection of the room, stood a figure. Tall, tall, and its hand, dark and clear, rested on his left shoulder. Not a ghostly palm, but a real one, with detailed fingers and creases at the knuckles. Leonid froze, holding his breath. The figure in the reflection didn't move, just stood there, pressed against his back, its face hidden in the shadows behind his head. From that moment, everything changed. Now he knew. This wasn't just a ghost. This was a specific someone, Vasily. And he wasn't just in the apartment, he was holding him. Now the touch could be felt even through clothes. Leonid started to feel his shoulder was always colder than the rest of his body. He began sleeping on his right side to avoid pressure on the left. Useless. He always woke up on his back, his left shoulder heavy and numb. He invited a priest. The man, turning pale, walked through the apartment, muttered something, sprinkled holy water in the corners, and left without taking any money. Before leaving, he turned and said, "He's been here a very long time, and he's holding on very tight. He's not clinging to the apartment, he's clinging to someone." That night, Leonid had a dream. He was sitting in the armchair in the living room, and Vasily stood beside him. His face was close. He smelled of dust and old paper. Nothing personal. Vasily spoke in a hoarse, hollow voice. "I just need a shoulder to lean on. My own is tired, and yours is so alive, so warm. It's mine now, an agreement." Leonid woke up with icy horror. The touch on his shoulder wasn't just weight, it was inside. As if roots of a foreign hand were growing into his muscles, his bone clinging to tendons. He jumped up, ran to the mirror in the hallway, and tore off his t-shirt. On his left shoulder, from the collarbone to the bicep, lay a bruise. Not the usual purple, but a yellowish-grey earthy color, like on an old corpse. And clearly visible was an imprint, 5 long fingers and a palm. Someone invisible was holding him with such force that it left a mark on his skin. He understood this was the end, an agreement. The apartment wasn't sold cheaply for no reason. It was sold along with a debt, with a tenant who needed a living shoulder, whose didn't matter, his. Leonid started drinking, heavily, to not feel the heaviness, the numbness that was now slowly spreading from his shoulder to his neck and down his arm. The fingers of his left hand sometimes clenched into a fist on their own when he didn't want them to. Once, looking in the mirror, he saw the left corner of his mouth twitch downward on its own, in a strange, foreign grimace. Vasily was settling in. Leonid spent the last night sober. He sat in the kitchen with all the lights on and waited. He knew something had to happen tonight. His arm hardly obeyed, hanging like a dead weight. The touch became unbearable. It was no longer a palm, but an entire figure pressed against his back, wrapped around him, fused with him. He heard a whisper right in his ear, a cold, damp breath that couldn't be there. Enough standing. Time to sit down. I need to rest. His left leg jerked on its own, and he stood up. Not him, his body. It led him from the kitchen to the living room, to that very armchair from the old photograph. He walked, and a freezing cold crept up his spine, digging into his vertebrae. He tried to scream, but only a rasp came from his throat. He sat down in the armchair. His left hand slowly, against his will, rose and rested on the armrest, in the exact same pose as the man in the cropped photo. In the large mirror opposite, he saw himself, sitting, pale, eyes wide with horror, and behind his back, a clear, sharp, almost tangible silhouette of Vasily, stooped in a worn-out jacket. His arms were wrapped around Leonid like dark pythons, and his face, he finally saw it. It wasn't angry. It was infinitely tired, empty, and utterly soulless. And that was more terrifying than any grimace. In the reflection, Vasily tilted his head and pressed his cheek against Leonid's shoulder, against his shoulder. His lips moved. Leonid felt the last spark of his will, his eye, like a light bulb, burning out, flare up and die somewhere deep inside, under the prison-like weight of a foreign soul. His own gaze in the mirror became empty, tired, alien. The body in the armchair sighed deeply. For the first time in many decades, the left hand habitually patted the armrest. The eyes scanned the room, his room, with a sense of profound, bone-deep satisfaction. Finally, thought something inside Leonid. One can sit down. And on the left shoulder, beneath the shirt, the earthy bruise, slowly, like a tattoo, began to take on clear, permanent outlines. The imprint of ownership would never fade. It was forever. Your room has gone quiet, too quiet. You are sitting, and perhaps only now are you noticing a slight, barely perceptible tension in your left shoulder. Just a draft, of course, or fatigue. Just your imagination, stirred up by the story. But just in case, maybe you shouldn't turn around right now. The house in the clearing. My grandfather bought a plot of land in a remote wooded area, an old dacha, for a bargain. Everyone warned him. The place was bad. A forester lived there last century, and then he and his family vanished without a trace. But grandfather was stubborn. The first few months were normal, aside from the constant feeling of being watched from the thicket. The house had one peculiar feature: a huge, almost wall-sized, old mirrored wardrobe in the living room. The glass was murky with dark stains, reflecting everything in a blurry, unpleasant way. Granddad said it smelled of damp earth and rotting leaves, though the wardrobe itself was dry. One late fall, I stayed there alone to help with insulation. Night caught me by surprise. The forest outside the window was black, completely silent. No birds, no wind. I was sitting with a book when I heard the first sound. A soft, wet shuffling, as if something heavy and damp was being dragged across the floor in the next room. My heart froze. I went still, listening. The shuffling approached the door to the living room and stopped. I stared at the crack under the door. There was only darkness. Minutes stretched like rubber. And suddenly, I realized the sound was no longer behind the door. It was here, in the room, but I was alone. Slowly, with a bony crunch of vertebrae, I turned my head toward the mirrored wardrobe. In its murky depths, the room was reflected the same way, with one exception. Right in front of the wardrobe, with its back to me, stood a wet, hunched figure. Dark water dripped from it, and hair, matted into strands, hid its face. It wasn't moving, just standing there, filling the space between me and my own reflection. I couldn't see it in reality, only in the mirror. I squeezed my eyes shut, whispering, "This isn't real." I opened them. The figure's reflection was still there, but now its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, as if studying my back in the reflection. And then its shoulders began to tremble slightly, as if it were laughing a silent, internal laugh. I bolted for the exit, ran out onto the porch, into the icy night. The door slammed behind me. I was in just a t-shirt, but staying in the house was impossible. I decided to make it to the car and leave. The phone's flashlight pulled roots and tree trunks from the darkness. I walked for about 5 minutes, bathed in cold sweat, when I suddenly ran into a fence. Our fence shouldn't have been there. I shone the light higher and saw the familiar carved porch. I had walked back to the house, to my house. Circling it, I kept ending up at the same porch. The forest, dense and silent, seemed to be tightening into a noose, returning me over and over. And in the living room window, the one with the wardrobe, my forgotten lamp was glowing weakly, and against that light I saw a clear silhouette, not one, but two, one sitting in the armchair May, and one standing behind, leaning over the seated figure. My last bit of strength left me. I crawled back into the house, unable to fight this anomaly. The living room was empty. The wardrobe mirror was black, like the entrance to a mine shaft. I collapsed onto the sofa, my back to it, staring at the opposite wall, shaking with terror and cold. I was just waiting for dawn. After an hour of silence, I heard a soft tap from behind, as if a fingernail lightly knocked on the glass from inside the wardrobe. Then another and another, rhythmic, insistent. I couldn't take it. I turned around. My reflection in the wardrobe was sitting on the sofa, staring right at me, but its eyes were wide with horror, its mouth twisted in a soundless scream. And behind it, with a hand on its shoulder, stood that same wet figure. Now I could see its face, empty sockets, a mouth stretched into a grimace too wide, and it was slowly stroking my reflection's head, soothingly, with a damp finger, leaving dark streaks. My reflection in the mirror, crying, slowly raised its hand and pointed a finger not at me, but in front of me, into the space of my real room. I felt a slight draft, smelling of swamp, behind my back, and a cold, wet touch on my own shoulder. Here the story cuts off. It was found as a voice recording on my phone, which was discovered in an abandoned house in a clearing. I myself disappeared. The house was empty. Only in the center of the wardrobe mirror was a clear handprint, as if someone from inside had been pushing against the glass for a long, hopeless time, trying to get out. And now that you've watched this, your screen went dark for a second, becoming a faint mirror. Are you absolutely sure that what is now reflected in it behind you is just your room?